Hello, I'm Paul LaRoche, and you're listening to Hidden Heritage. First of all, I'd like to pass along my sincere gratitude to all of the Hidden Heritage podcast listeners. This is still a relatively new podcast. I think we're on about episode 30 or so. And I've noticed that we've been gathering a nice large audience. So I want to thank you for helping to give Hidden Heritage a good start. I myself have really been enjoying this podcast, so I will continue to bring you quality content and stories from across Native America. There are many episodes to come, so please share Hidden Heritage and continue to follow our stories and tell your friends if you can. Okay, on this episode, I was going through some of the archives and stumbled across this interview from 2017. As I recall, I was getting ready to play for a rare solo performance in the small local community theater. I've listened to this interview and thought that you would enjoy it, so here's the full interview from 7 years ago.
ReadyWorks, Jared Rodemaker here as we are moving along here on our morning show. As well, we get an opportunity here to speak with, we have a very special guest on the line. Very excited to learn more. We're going to talk this morning with Paul LaRoche. We're going to talk about him coming to the Bark in Windham. I talked with Paul LaRoche and talk about Brulé and the story behind Brulé, a solo performance coming up. Paul, how are you doing today?
I'm just fine, Jared. Thank you very much, and thanks for having me. Thanks for having me on your radio.
Absolutely, really do appreciate it, Paul. Before we kind of get talking about Brulé and the performance coming up, for those who don't know your story, tell us a little bit about you and how you're connected to the area.
Absolutely, Jared. I think I've shared our story many times over the years, but if I can kind of do if I can give you the 2-minute version, it would go something like this. I was one of the Native American kids that was adopted at birth and removed from our country's reservation system. I was raised by 2 wonderful parents. I grew up actually in Worthington, and this was back in the days when it was still a little bit taboo to mention that you had Native American descent or lineage in your family tree. So even though I was adopted right out of the reservations out there in South Dakota, my parents never told me that. I think it was a protective device, but they were wonderful parents. Irma and Clarence Summers were my mom and dad. I was Paul Summers back in those days. And I have the best of memories. I grew up, graduated in 73 from Worthington High School, and lo and behold, lost both parents at the age of 38. And my wife, Kathy, who is also from Worthington, Kathy Frisch, some people might remember her. Her family runs the Rooney's Furniture Store right there in Worthington.
Oh, okay.
We married up, and the years passed, and after the loss of both of my parents, she went on a search, found my adoption papers, and the whole journey took us back to the Indian Reservation, and I was reunited with my biological family back in 1993, and that was the beginning of Brulé. And so 20 years have gone by, and here we are today. A lot has happened, Jared.
Well, Paul, let's talk a little bit then about you in terms of music. Were you always a kid right away from when you can remember early that was kind of moved and inspired by music?
Well, yes, and this solo performance that we're embarking on here, it kind of is really an attempt to tell this whole story musically. My first instrument, Jared, was an accordion. My dad bought me an accordion when I was 7 years old, and I took lessons from a little music store in Worthington that is no longer there. It was called Friesen Music Center. It sat right across from the State Theater.
Oh.
and so I got my accordion lessons, and that really started me in the world of music. I was hooked, even though the accordion wasn't very popular. I stuck with it for a few years, and as time went by, I switched to the piano and started playing the piano and the organ, and got into music groups and rock bands, probably starting back in junior high days. At least my earliest memory is a talent show back in the junior high building, which used to be connected to the Memorial Auditorium back in those days. So got into rock bands back in the 60s. It was a great time to grow up if you loved music. And, we tried to emulate all the bands of the time, the Stones, the Beatles, and everything in between. And so the years passed, and I always had one foot in the door in the world of music. And my wife, Kathy, supported the whole endeavor over the years. And so, I guess you can say that, I got started in music, very early and was able to stay in it my entire life.
We're talking here with Paul LaRoche, and we're talking about, again, we'll be close talking about Paul's upcoming performance at the Bark and Wyndham, the Story Behind Brulé, a solo performance. So maybe we should talk more a little bit about Brulé. And if no one's really seen a Brulé performance, it is so much more than just music. Can you kind of talk about the experience of putting on a performance through Brulé?
Certainly. Jared, you can kind of imagine a little bit what it would be like to discover at the age of 38 that you're part of another culture that you never had any idea about. The discovery of our Native American heritage, or my Native American heritage, was kind of it's almost a life-changing experience. The moment you hear that information, you start to reprogram everything that you thought about and kind of that you've learned over the years. So when we ended up moving back to the reservation for almost 7 years, and we assimilated back into the culture, and that assimilation, that reverse assimilation, was really what spawned this idea for this fusion, this musical fusion of kind of a cultural fusion. I had grown up with sounds of mainstream American rock and roll, and all of a sudden I was introduced to now these tribal sounds I had never heard before. So it was kind of a natural process to want to combine those two sounds, and that's really where the idea for Brulé came from. And to this day, I tell people that we've been kind of pioneering one of the last musical frontiers. It's the emergence of Native America out into the mainstream. But very simply put, really, it's a combination. Our show became a combination of, mainstream American music of all types, with the fusion of Native American rhythms and percussions, and then we introduced Native American dance into our show at one point, and that became very popular. So today, a Brulé performance is very theatrical. It's a combination of what we call kind of contemporary American Indian music, which is really borrowed heavily on classic rock from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and traditional Native American dance, which is very flamboyant, very spectacular. And so the whole thing is turned into kind of a theatrical extravaganza. And it's just been musically, it's been a very exciting musical venture. And there's never been a dull moment. We've always got another project kind of ready to go. And, we've got a lot in terms of kind of bringing our culture up into mainstream America. There's still a lot of work to do, but so that's just a little bit about, what Brulé is and what it became over the past 20 years.
So what has kind of led you then, again, the new tour is The Story Behind Brulé, a solo performance by Brulé founder Paul LaRoche. I guess what led you then to kind of go out and kind of this solo venue?
Well, part of our show every evening, or every performance, every concert, part of the show has been, there's a little storytelling segment to it, and we found that it's very important to keep that in there. Our audience has really enjoyed learning a little bit about how Brulé came to be and the family reunion that started this whole thing and the journey between the two worlds. But during a 90-minute concert, I only really have a few minutes to try to tell that story, and we're able to do it, but it's very condensed, and it still works. But having had 20 years to kind of feel the impact of that, I've realized early on and years ago that the story behind Brulé was as important as the music that came off the stage. And so, there's been so many people that have asked about the story and how this came to be. And at one point, we even published a book called Hidden Heritage, which told the story. But even then, even in book form, we kind of were only able to tell certain parts of the story. It just became a fascination of ours that, we thought we started this idea about 10 years ago, of the idea of going out and just basically telling as much of the story as we possibly could from the stage. And what really pushed it over the edge was a few years ago, somebody had asked me to play some songs from the old days. And so, Brulé is basically an instrumental music group. We don't really pull on English lyrics. We use some Native American vocables and sounds and chants, but we didn't really use what you and I would call lyrics. So when they asked me to do some old songs, I started to pull out some Billy Joel songs and, Neil Diamond songs, stuff I used to sing from the old days, the Stones and the Beatles, and everybody went, what the, where did that come from? And I realized that, there was a big part of this musically that we hadn't been able to really share with our audience over the years. And it didn't really fit into the theatrical performance that we had built. And, so the idea came about to just go out and do a very scaled down solo performance that really went beyond the 20 years of Brulé musically. It went back into the music that we were doing, that I was doing back in junior high days, and all the way back up through high school graduation, through the college days, then to the basement rock band days, the garage band days, Worthington nightclubs and ballrooms around Southwest Minnesota, and clubs in Minneapolis, and the whole thing. Nobody had a clue that was part of the musical influences that became Brulé. So this solo performance is a chance to share that with our audience.
Yeah, it sounds. Oh, sorry, Paul. I was just going to say it sounds really like a great way to kind of get in depth and kind of get more personable with the audience.
It really is, Jared. It's a lot of storytelling, but there's a lot of music crammed into the show too. And this is a new format for us, so we're really just starting this. But the first couple of shows we ran, I was a little nervous, and I normally don't get like that after doing this for 45 years. But the minute that we kind of broke the ice, I realized that I think it was important to do this. Very enjoyable, from an artist standpoint, to be able to tell the whole story. And, I try not to focus on myself as an individual, but, we've had so many supporters and friends and fans who have supported Brulé and have stood by us steadfast over the years. And to those folks, it really was a completion of a bit of a closure to really to get a taste of all that happened before Brulé began, because obviously the music of Brulé, even though it's instrumental music, was really influenced by the music that was part of my musical life and our family's musical journey from back in those early days. So I think it puts a bit of a closure on the whole Brulé story.
Once again, we're visiting here today with Paul LaRoche. He is the founder of Brulé, and of course, very exciting as the new tour, The Story Behind Brulé, a solo performance by Paul LaRoche. I'm going to come right here in our backyard to the Windham Business Arts and Recreation Center, the Windham Bark, located at 1012 5th Avenue in Windham. Tickets are available at the Bark and at local stores. If you want to go to the Bark, their ticket booth is open daily Monday through 8 to 5, or give them a call at 831-2375 for more information. It's all general admission, $12 tickets, first come, first serve on the seating and the performance. Saturday, April 22nd at 3 in the afternoon at the Bark Auditorium in Windham. Paul, I guess one more question before I go. I guess talking with you and obviously your story and being, exposed to so much culture, when you were first really inundated with the Native American culture and especially the music, what was it initially that really just spoke to you deeply about the Native American music and that part of their culture?
Well, that's a good question. I can answer it very easily. It was a spiritual thing, to be honest with you, Jared. And I don't get religious like that, but that's the best way for me to put it. When we came back to the reservation, Lower Brule Sioux Reservation out in South Dakota, and I began to listen to those tribal sounds and understand what was really going on with that music. It was apparent to me that, even the music that I had grown up with, the rock and roll music from the 60s and 70s, had a thread that was woven through it that was very closely connected to the tribal sounds I was hearing. As a matter of fact, my first powwow in 1994, I sat listening to these sounds, and the sound just came together in my head, and it just really showed me that even though our cultures are vastly different, the mainstream American culture and deep Native American culture, there's a lot of differences there, but there's a lot of similarities as well. And music is one of them. I found that common ground, musically between the cultures. And we're talking about two cultures that were at odds with each other throughout America's growing pains. So the music became a way for the cultures to come together. And so there was a spiritual nature to it. It was a very rewarding artistic journey. And as time went by, as the 20 years went by, we realized that, that telling the story and using music as the common denominator also was an example that we as human beings are very closely connected. We just don't realize it and we don't think about it. But I'm a product of two worlds, and I'm a son of two mothers that were taken apart and reunited. And in that reunion, I think there was a demonstration that for the average human being, that regardless of the color of our skin and regardless of our politics and our religious barriers that we place up, at some point we're very closely connected, and we're all part of the same human race. And our story is an example of us human beings being very closely connected, and our mission of reconciliation then became complete. So part of what we've tried to do is be an example that even our cultures in America here, the ones that have been at odds with each other, we're coming together, and we're those times are gone. The old days are still there, but they've changed. And we stand as an example that we can heal from those wounds of the past and move forward and find common ground between all of our cultures. That's our thing.
Well-spoken words again by Paul LaRoche, our guest here on the First News Morning on AM 730 and FM 100.3 KWOA. Again, Paul's solo performance Saturday, April 22nd, 3 p.m. at the Wyndham Bark, the Business Arts and Recreation Center, 1012 5th Avenue in Wyndham. Again, the Bark's ticket booth is open daily Monday through Friday to 8 to 5. Give them the call if you'd like more information at the Wyndham Bark office. It's 507-831-2375. And again, the Story Behind Brulé, the new tour. They got venues throughout the Midwest. So if you'd like more information about the tour, you can go to www.brule.records. That's BRULE records.com/tour and find out more. Paul, we really appreciate a few moments of your time. Thank you so much. And we really look forward to you coming to our neck of the woods.
Thanks, Jared. This whole thing started in Worthington, and, coming back to Worthington is always a thrill. And I owe a lot to the families and people and friends from Worthington who were supporters of ours and gave us encouragement way back in the early days. And so just a shout out to say thanks to all the folks from Worthington who were there in the early days and who are still there to support us now, and the families and friends and the Frisch family and all of our friends back in that area. I look forward to coming back to the area.
Paul, we wish you safe travels and continued success on the new tour. And again, we thank you for your time today.
Thank you for joining us today on Hidden Heritage. I'm your host, Paul LaRoche, reminding you that if you enjoyed the podcast, share us with your friends and help us to spread the word. Till next time, from all of us in Brulé, thank you.